Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Jim Olson with the National Tile Contractors Association, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend today's webinar. The webinar is titled Review of the 2021 IBC Tile Building Code Update, and it's sponsored by Custom Building Products. Before I introduce today's speakers, I need to remind you that during the webinar you will be muted. Please use the questions area on your computer to type in your questions. We will answer your questions at the end of this presentation. If the audio on your computer is poor, call the number on your invite and listen on your phone. All of our webinars are available to watch at any time on the NTCA YouTube channel shortly after the webinars are presented. About 72 hours, we'll have it up on YouTube. Please go to the NTCA YouTube channel, subscribe, and you'll be notified of all upcoming NTCA videos, including all technical webinars, giving you easy access to watch all current and past programs at your convenience. Today, we are fortunate to have three amazing speakers. First up is Dale Roberts. He began his career in the local tile union in Southern California. He was a California licensed contractor for 16 years. He has earned several trade certifications, including LEED Lead Green Associate and CSI Construction Document Technologist. Dale has written articles for the Tile Letter magazine and CSI Construct Specifier magazine. Dale has been with Custom Building Products for 17 years. Our second speaker today is Bill Griese, the Director of Standards Development and Sustainability Initiatives for the Tile Council of North America, or TCNA. He is involved in the standard development and revision of ASTM, Ansi, ISO, and other industry standards. Griese served 3 consecutive terms as chairman of the ASTM Committee C21 on ceramic whitewares and related products, and currently serves as chairman of the ASTM C21.06 on ceramic tile. He's also active in the ASTM Committee E60 on sustainability, was previously appointed chairman of ASTM's Regulatory Committee on Technical Committee Operations, and is currently serving a 3-year term on ASTM International's Board of Directors. Griese is a regular author and columnist in several industry publications. He's a LEED Lead Accredited Professional with a specialty in building design and construction. He earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Ceramic and Material Engineer from Clemson University. And last but not least is Will White, Director of Technical Communications and Training at Custom Building Products, and has over 35 years in the flooring industry, and is a member of the Tile Council of North America, National Tile Contractors Association, Natural Stone Institute of America, and American National Standards Institute, International Concrete Institute Technical Committees, and a member of the National Wood Flooring Association. Please welcome these three amazing speakers. Thank you, you guys. I really look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. So just to give you guys a little bit of a heads up, I'll be doing the first part of the presentation. Will's going to be jumping into it a little bit deeper, and then we'll turn it over to Bill. Will and Bill, as we go through this presentation, feel free to jump in at any time, make any comments. I apologize for not being on the webcam today, guys. Having a little bit of issues with my webcam. Also, I've got a face for radio, so I'm much happier without the webcam. So with that, we're covering 2021 and kind of building code updates, and give you a little bit of general overall updates on the building codes itself, give you a little bit of a general understanding. So before we get to 2021, I'm not going to go too far back, but we're going to kind of give you an overview of some of the building codes, how they work, how they're adopted, and give you kind of a general feel. So the main purpose of these building codes is to protect public health. Also for insurance agencies, so that they can kind of regulate how much it's going to cost to insure buildings. And so it's really up to the local authorities having jurisdiction, and we'll probably be covering that on which codes are adopted as we go along here. So what we want to keep in mind is these are minimum standards as we go through. So we have a kind of a whole series of code books. These are guides for the officials, or what we call AHJs, authority having jurisdictions, and they review these codes. There's a whole process going through as they update the codes every 3 to 5 years typically, and these what are called our model building codes. Now, the 3 or 4 big ones, the International Building Codes covers commercial structures. IRC, the Residential Building Codes, covers single family homes, 2-family structures. So if it's a multi-family high-rise, that's going to fall into the International Building Code. Again, single family homes, and then we have our 2 plumbing codes. It's kind of divided up which states cover which codes. And then there's a lot of other codes. Very important, of course, is the fire code, mechanical code, existing building, kind of tenant improvement codes, that kind of things. So these codes, depending on which code it is updated every 3 to 5 years. There's a very long update cycle. As soon as they publish a code, they actually start the revision process again. They're voted on, approved, they go through a comment period, and then finally adopted as these model codes. The model codes are not law yet. They're just that, a model codes there for the taking for all the states that have. They can choose to ignore these codes, or they can update them to the newer codes. So we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but the model codes have no legal status until adopted by the local authorities having jurisdiction. So as you can see here, it varies widely by the states. In some of these states, there's a home rule that allows the counties and even the cities to adopt what they want. So until that state, county, city actually adopts those codes, they're not enforced. We'll cover a little bit of the differences here, but you can kind of see it widely varies throughout the United States. Now, the states reserve the power for these building codes given to them underneath the Constitution, the 10th Amendment. The exceptions would be buildings that are built across the United States. For example, federal buildings built in each state but owned by the U.S. government. Those are going to have their own standards. Manufactured homes have a set standard because these can be built in one state, sold in another state. And the same process for these pre-constructions, modular buildings they're putting up now. Those are going to be guided by one building code. So we mentioned the home rule. Each state is allowed to do what they will. They can give the authority to the counties. They can give the authority to the local cities on whether they want to adopt these amendments or not. The authorities having jurisdiction, the localities can adopt these, and even the states can make them so that some have to adopt the whole code and it can only make stricter restrictions. Some states allow them to change anything in that model code they want. So again, it varies state by state. So when you're looking at the codes in your state, you want to check with your local authorities because they're the ones that are putting that code into place. They're the ones that are going to do the inspection. What we're kind of giving you here is a general overview. So you have an understanding of the codes. The new big change coming up with the large format, large panel tiles that we have coming into play here. So again, each state has local jurisdiction and it's a unique code for that state or city. These are enacted by the legislations, and that's why it's very important to empower the city council, giving them that. They empower the code enforcements. They can go out and do local code enforcements, whether it be the fire code, the building codes, mechanical codes, anything like that. Now, the states, again, have the right to apply the code, and we talked about how different that is. So for example, Texas is using the 2003 International Building Code. They have not adopted any of the newer codes. They have a very loose guidelines for construction, and especially for zoning. You can build a house right next to an amusement park, or an amusement park right next to a house. And so that will change which codes you're looking at. So Indiana, in the blue there, you see some of the states, they're using the 2012 cycle International Building Code model. In the yellow, they're adopting a little bit newer ones, 2015, and California and all the other green states are using 2018. So no one is currently under the 2021 IBC code yet. And again, the states have to review it and pass on to the cities where they are going to adopt that code. For example, Arizona kind of skipped by the 2015 code. They went from 2012 to the 2018. They never went ahead and adopted it. But Arizona, again, mainly by cities, most of the cities are pretty in line with each other. I think Scottsdale's a little bit out of line these days. I think they're still using the 2012, and I'm not 100% sure on that. I have to check again. Like I said, these things kind of change, and there's a lot of moving parts you have to keep up with. It's much easier to keep up with your local authority having jurisdiction than it is to keep up with the complete United States. So these are the IBC. They're produced by the International Code Council. Again, the International Building Code comes out every 3 years. And now in Chapter 14, in the exterior adhered masonry veneer porcelain 2021 is the big change that's coming up. So to kind of give you a little view of what was in the past, we're not going too far back, but 2009, we had the Chapter 14 adhered masonry veneers should comply with the Masonry Society Handbook, the TMS and ACI 6.1, and this limited adhered masonry veneer unit sizes to 5 square feet in total face area and shall not weigh more than 15 pounds per square foot. Now, when I would go out to the code officials, the HJs, and ask them about this, they would tell me porcelain tile did not have any code restrictions. And again, this was only a couple. They would say that this referred to masonry, whether it be brick, block, stone, some of the manufactured stone, the concrete tiles, those type of areas it would refer to. And some did kind of consider tile in the adhered masonry veneers. So again, it's like a cop pulls you over. He can find pretty much anything he wants and kind of manipulate it into his code. The same thing with these codes. For example, I had put up a gazebo in my backyard. The guy came over and told me, well, this can't be a gazebo because you didn't put 16 inches on center. And he said, this looks more like a pergola. If it's pergola, I can sign it off. And I said, yep, it's a pergola. So I called it a gazebo and he called it a pergola, but we were still good to go and got that approved. So that's some of the things that code officials can do, but this gives you the size requirements before 2009. Now, in 2012, they changed that code to reduce the area, size, and weight of that tile assembly. They reduced it quite a bit, down to 3 square feet in face area. Sorry. So that was the big change there. And that really restricted us on what we could put on the exteriors of tiles. We used a lot of times an alternative materials design and methods. This is allowed in the building code. In Chapter 1, there's actually a provision for this. They look back on the manufacturers of the adhesives to make these recommendations. They look at past history, successful projects that have been in your local area. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in Will's part of the presentation, but we can definitely use this in the past. So Just want to make the distinction between interior and exterior. Exterior has its own challenges because of the temperature differentials, the sun, the cold, the heat, the expansion differential between these. That's why they put the restrictions on. On the interior adhered mason areas, there's no size limitations, only by weight. So maximum weight for interiors would be 20 pounds per square foot. Now, as the adhesive manufacturer, I'd probably recommend only about 15 pounds per square foot. And for natural stone, just kind of a rule of thumb, this is typically going to be about 3/4 of an inch thick. This has not changed in the 2021. I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of review of that. So again, 2021 has not been adopted yet. For example, the IBC Model Code 2018 was released January 2018. California reviewed it for a year, put it out, had comments, came back and adopted the building code in 2019, but it would not go into effect until January 1st, 2020. So that means that the 2018 code has actually only been in effect 1 year now. So it does take a while to publish these for the states to adopt them. And they have to really review these codes because generally the codes get more restrictive and that adds to the building cost. So they want to see if that's going to put too much restrictions on the building codes. There will be certain localities that maybe want to be more restrictive. Miami-Dade County, very concerned about hurricanes. So they're going to adopt additional code requirements for those exterior veneers. California earthquake, they're going to adopt a little bit stricter codes regarding earthquake prevention. So in this new code, the exterior masonry veneers have added a new porcelain tile. Now this was in the 2012, but not the 2009. So when it calls out specifically porcelain tile, this is referring to that. And the gauged porcelain tile slabs, the GPTP, basically anything under 1/4 of an inch, the facial dimension has basically tripled in size. So now we can go to 17.5 square feet for facial dimension, where the old 2012 code was 3 square feet. So the technology for making these panels is much better these days. Our adhesives are much greater. We get much greater shear bond strengths out of these. So we can go much larger now. Now with the standard thickness porcelain tiles, 9 square feet. So again, this is due to better manufacturing adhesives, better test methods, and also 6 pounds per square foot, which is generally under most average porcelain tiles. Porcelain tiles are generally going to be around 4 or 5 pounds per square foot. So generally it's not going to put a limitation on the weight. It's generally going to be the facial dimension. And that's still pretty large. To be able to get a 36 by 36 standard tile on the side of a building is pretty good. So we have to remember that's porcelain tile. Anything for manufactured stone, the concrete masonries, natural stone, goes back to the old TMS, where the adhered unit shall not be more than 2 5/8 in thickness, 36 inches in any face dimension, and no more than 15 pounds per square foot. So this requirements for masonry, manufactured stone, and this is for the new GPTP thin panel slabs. So one of the things is they do require at least a 50 PSI shear bond strength on that. Now I've been involved in testing of these after they've been installed. A lot of this is the type of mortar they're going to be using, the application of that mortar, and the coverage rate. Now the NTCA has the trial and error, which is excellent video if you have not seen that yet on getting the proper coverage. I've seen one failure where they use the highest shear bond strength mortar, most expensive mortar, but they were only getting about 50% coverage on that back. They tried to use a crosshatch system where they troweled or combed on the substrate in one direction, and they thought they would get better coverage if they troweled in the opposite directions. They never got the ridges to collapse. Basically, the ridges were just sitting upon the ridges. So they got very low bond strength, but they just barely passed this 50 PSI shear bond test. They would have to take out all the tile on that building if they hadn't met that. So it's very important to hit that and get the proper coverage on that. And a lot of times it will take back buttering. It's very difficult to get these walls that flat that you can just comb it on the substrate, but back troweling is the new terminology that we're using these days. Flat troweling that backside of that porcelain tile. So again, commercial buildings, there are no restrictions for the height. Now, all the time I say, hey, there is restrictions, it's 20 feet, it's 30 feet, but there's restrictions on that. In the International Building Code, commercial buildings, there are no height restrictions. As long as they get that 50 pounds per square foot, as long as they can control, restrain differential movement, there's no sagging of those studs, buildings, deflection in those walls, we can go as high as we want. Now, I have to bring up that is different than the residential. Again, single family homes, there are limitations on the wall area, how high you can go. And they have a chart that's dependent on seismic map. So it's going to be different again across the United States, where you're located, which zone you're going to fall into. So I'm in Southern California, zone D. Here's ABC, maximum height of veneer above non-combustible foundation, 30 feet. So that's where you usually hear that, well, you can only go 30 feet high. Single family homes, yes. And in SoCal, 20 feet high. Now, generally that's a 2-story building, so it pretty much covers everything anyways. In the residential, you usually don't see too many over 20 feet. So that'll generally fall into that category there. So with that, I'll pass it over to Will.
Excellent. Very good, Dale. Thank you very much. Okay. So for years, we've installed larger format tile bodies on exterior veneers beyond the limitations. And the code is not designed to restrict any of the materials or design methods. It's sheerly out of, as Dale had mentioned, health, but predominantly in this case, out of safety. So Dale, if you can see here that tile's actually coming off the side of a building. And this really wasn't anything to do with the tile assembly or the installation. This was accessories related to the drip edge on the side of the building. Dale, if you would, next slide.
Sure, and I'd like to mention that happens more often than you would think. We actually had a building, they had no way to get the moisture out of the wall assembly, and there was no cap on top of that parapet, so moisture was going right down inside that, rusting a lot of that stuff, and you were seeing failures caused by just architectural failure, basically.
So the Chapter 14 impacts that we've been working through for the past decade, basically, have created some challenges in design, and have often challenged the architect to respecify exterior veneer materials, and in some cases, especially with the gauge porcelain tile panels, have required a secondary fabrication method to change the sizes to meet the current restrictions. And you can see that the gauge panel manufacturers have actually begun to offer different sizes, not just to accommodate exterior, but interior as well. But that's definitely played into the code limitations that currently existed. Next slide. So mechanical fastening systems. Next slide. Supplemental. So this is still an adhered exterior veneer installation method, but to work alongside current code limitations. These mechanical systems have definitely gotten more popular and played a key role and have enabled a multitude of installations across various states. So it's a definite adjunct to the installation assembly, and it's played very, very well. Next slide.
You would use this typically when your code official had reservations about using that tile on the side of it, direct adhered system. So this would give them the confidence to go ahead and use a direct adhered system along with a mechanical fasten system.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the alternative materials process in the IBC. That can be found in section chapter 1, scope and admin. And it clearly states that, the codes are not intended to prevent the installation or design methods, but to promote safety. So this is an allowance to enable alternative materials or larger formatted tile bodies, and has been utilized quite a bit for the gauge porcelain tile panel portion of the market to enable design methods. And this is commonly referred to as a variance or variance request. And you can see the little graphic on the right is kind of a template that's been used on many projects. Dale, I don't know how many projects you've worked on that have gone through this process.
Several. And I'd have to say, in the old days, it was a little bit tougher with the new 2021 code having those larger format tiles. This is a pretty much slam dunk. In the old days, the liquid applied waterproofing membrane was not in the building code. It was typically very tough to get it in. But once they included it for those 2 years beforehand, we could do substitutions very easily. It'll be the same thing with these large porcelain panels now. Much easier to get it approved as an alternate method of installation.
Excellent. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the 2021 changes. And what really drove the change or the recognition on the IBC or the ICC's part was new technologies with the gauge porcelain tiles and with ordinary porcelain tiles that are getting thinner. So weight loads are reduced, which is a major concern, and material definitions for gauge porcelain tile panels that were published through Ansi A137.3. Also, the recognition and development of the improved modified dry set cement mortar standard of Ansi A118.15, showing much higher bond strengths. Partnered with the certification for standard tiles through CFI and through CTEF, as well as gauge porcelain tile panel trainings that have been executed on many fronts through manufacturers like ourselves, the panel manufacturers, and through the ACT program, and then partnered with new tooling developments and simple things as even as a trowel redesign has helped improve that contact, that coverage, and well exceed that 50 PSI daily on an average basis. Next slide, please.
Sure, we test our adhesives very extensively, heat aging, shear bond strengths, and we would never make these recommendations unless we were highly confident that if installed properly, that these will provide successful 100-year buildings. When we see these fail, it's generally either application errors or architectural missing the details. And we have a checklist that we, with the architect sometimes, that we go through to make sure that they don't miss just small things like drip edges and covering that parapet.
Right, right. Yeah, and the minimum shear bond values of A118.15 is 400 PSI. So I'm absolutely certain that if proper installation takes place, it well exceeds the 50 PSI, and the modification that's in those bonding mortars can well sustain the expansion and freestall cycling. Just don't forget your movement joints when you're designing and installing adhered veneers. Those are very important. So
Very critical, getting that EJ 171 expansion joints detailed by the architect, design engineer.
absolutely, and let's talk about when this was submitted. So it was actually submitted in 2019, but preparatory work on the submissions began well before that. And the proponents were the International Masonry Institute and the Tile Council of North America. Obviously was supported by NTCA and us as manufacturers as well. We all supported the effort, felt it was long overdue, but more importantly, I think we all agreed that we had all the right components together to create some confidence in the changes proposed. So for that reason, it was just a unanimous approval with all that collective support and the new technologies combined. Next slide, please. So Dale kind of touched on the changes, really broken down into weight differential, which makes absolute sense. And weight translates into allowable face dimensions and total square feet or total face area allowances. Very easy to understand. Approved backings are required as well. So that's another key piece in the design element, which translates into long-term performance of the overall assembly. Next slide, please. So it's just some visuals. You may have seen these before. I love these visuals. It makes things very, very simple. Now we're past the 12 by 24s. We're into 24 by 48s for your average tile weights, even into 36 by 36 for your average porcelain tile. So that's at or greater than 3.5 pounds per square foot. Next slide, please.
So I guess I'm getting a little long in the tooth. When I was installing tile, we were getting into 18 by 18 was big and 24 by 24 was huge. We were putting those on the floor. I just can't imagine guys doing 36 by 36 and now even 6-foot panels on the exteriors of buildings. So technology has really changed.
Absolutely, and not just the adhesives, but the weight and the performance of the tile and the thickness of the tiles too. Now less than 3.5 pounds per square foot, you can go much larger. It makes sense. It's all weight based. Next slide, please. And then we get into the gauge panels. So these sizes were coordinated with the tile manufacturers that makes sense for generic panels manufactured. How can we cut them up? What makes sense? The least amount of waste. So there was definite coordination between the IMI, TCNA, and the tile manufacturers. And in particular, when we get into these 36 by 72s, that's going to be your maximum dust press size. And then those sizes work out well into the plate or roller press for the gauge porcelain tile panels as well. Next slide, please.
So remember, for these gauge porcelain panels, that size has tripled from last year's code.
Yep. So all this timing works out well. During the lobbying efforts in 18 and 19, we had the existence of Ansi A108.19, which is the interior installation for gauge porcelain tile panels. And we also had the material standard of A137.3. Post that lobbying effort, at that same time, we were working in the Ansi committees on the exterior installation of gauge porcelain tile panels, which is now available and is A108.20. So that kind of completes that scope for the gauge panel tile market space. You've got a material standard, you've got interior and exterior installation guidelines in place. So this will just enable more use of that material along with the IBC changes. So we feel that, working on the installation portion now is probably kind of a focus on the last remaining pieces of the puzzle, as well as working with the architects on overall design assemblies, especially those firms that may have been a bit hesitant to move into this segment with larger tile bodies or panels for your exterior adhered veneer systems. Next slide, please. So just a quick eye chart in the changes from 18 to 21. You can see this. It is quite dramatic, but it's really quite dramatic because the restrictions in 18 were really long overdue to be updated. So all the timing worked out, all the parties came together, and we're very excited about this and very confident moving forward. Next slide, please. Just a note, in the changes, you'll find in your minimum thickness of weather coatings, there's been updates as well. And you can see that the porcelain tile has been modified from 0.25 to 0.125, and that's for the obvious inclusion of gauge porcelain tile panels. Next slide, please. Bill, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, wonderful. Will, thanks Dale for the thorough walkthrough of the upcoming changes, which I echo your sentiment. We're very excited for jurisdictions over the next couple of years to start talking about the most efficient adoption protocols. So in that light, I want to close out today's talk by discussing a little bit kind of bigger picture, the importance of tile industry relevance in the code. All of you know that the tile industry, perhaps more than our competitive industries, is a very technical industry. We have a lot of standards, a lot of specifications, a lot of attention given to standards so that we can ensure floors, walls, and surfaces are covered safely and effectively. And in the spirit of the building codes here, we want to make sure that those standards are translated into the criteria that are adopted around the country. And so we talked so far today all about walls, exterior walls, interior walls. So what about floors? Want to go to the next slide, please, Dale? When we think about safety on the floors, the first thing that comes to mind is slip resistance. That's something that we have a real opportunity for improvement in the codes, especially with the advancements we've made as an industry in developing standards, developing test methods, and setting thresholds within our specifications. Next slide. So I'm going to focus on IPAMO. And why IPAMO? We've been talking about ICC with the International Building Code and the IRC with the Residential Code and the other suite of codes under ICC. But IPAMO is also relevant, much like ICC's suite of codes. IPAMO's suite of codes are also what, as Dale outlined, they're called framework codes, model codes available for adoption. So just like IBC or IRC or even in the case of pools, that there's a swimming pool code by ICC. Much like those codes, IPAMO's suite of codes can also be adopted by states and then even further by local municipalities where the states allow. And the reason I'm starting with the IPAMO code, the Uniform Swimming Pool Spa and Hot Tub Code, is because just this year, for the first time ever, there are code specified and measurable walkway criteria. This is a huge advancement in the world of building codes, and we hope this sets the foundation for future improvements across other codes throughout the suite of codes under IPAMO and also under ICC. This will lead to safer specification of flooring in terms of slip resistance. It provides a means to test, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Our previous dilemma was that we weren't able to test or specify what it meant to be slip resistant. Floors, the criteria just simply said slip resistant. But it's important to have these test methods and these thresholds because it increases the important dialogue between owners and specifiers, so there's no ambiguity in why products are selected, which products are selected and why. And most importantly, there are measurable criteria in the unfortunate event of an accident. We need to be able to turn to codes to find out where the violation, if there was one, may have occurred and who might be responsible. So for all these reasons, it's important to have non-ambiguous criteria, especially given the brevity of the code. When you look at code language, it's very brief, and so you want to make sure that language is as objective as possible. So IPAMO was the first organization to bring in this walkway criteria, slip resistance criteria for walkways, and we're pleased that this effort was chaired by TCNA with real experts in the arena, in this arena of slip resistance, with tile industry being, and the hard surface industry really, with our Ansi standard being the only one out there with test methods and objective criteria. It made sense to get in there and talk with IPAMO when they expressed an interest to lead this task group. Next slide.
And this is a huge thing because most of the code officials and model codes have walked back their slip resistance. Basically, the only thing they refer to is it must be slip resistant. They don't have any testing. They don't have any criteria. So they really kind of have walked back. They're trying not to touch that because of the case of slip and falls. But that is huge that the IPAMO has done that.
Yeah. Exactly. Thanks, Dale. So what are the criteria? Well, for level surfaces is exactly what we say in our industry standard ANSI A326.3. The minimum dynamic coefficient of friction is 0.42 if the floor is expected to be walked upon when wet, which, as you can imagine, in swimming pool, spa, and hot tub applications, the answer is almost always yes. Really, in all flooring scenarios, the answer is almost always yes, because any floor can become wet at any time. But not to get too far into the philosophy of slip resistance. The good news for the industry is that's the standard we're already specifying in all of our industry standards. 137.1 for tile, 137.2 for glass. Both reference this A326.3 standard, which is also developed by the A108 committee. When it comes to incline surfaces, it gets a little bit more tricky. We don't have a tile industry standard for the minimum Decoff on incline surfaces. However, it was important to the code developers under IPAMO to have some objective criteria, and so their solution is quite clever. They base it on the level 0.42 requirement, but that minimum value gets corrected. They call it a minimum corrected Decoff, and your minimum Decoff is dependent on your angle. So the formula you see there, to take you back to your high school trigonometry classes, you need to know the angle of your ramp, which you can pretty easily calculate if you know the slope of X feet and X and 10, whatever if it's a 1 in 10, 2 in 10, whatever it may be, you can calculate the angle, and then you just insert that angle into the formula. You can see there 0.42 is in the formula as the basis, and once you crank out that calculation, you have your standard Decoff based on the level of the ramp. And so again, that's level surfaces is 0.42, and incline surfaces is whatever the answer is when you put in your variable of the angle in that equation. Now, this is all good and well. Those of you familiar with the test know that it works quite well for surfaces which are nominally flat, but when you get into deep and heavy texture, the test method, the device, it's called the BOT 3000E, doesn't always do a good job because it may catch a high point or may not reach enough surfaces in the low point to get a true Decoff reading. So when that's not possible on site per this code, the code requires to obtain a nominally flat flooring sample. So if that's concrete, for example, if it's a textured concrete, it would require that you pour a nominally flat test section just to get that measurement on the material property. If it's a tile, if it's a heavily textured tile, check with the manufacturer to see if they have a nominally flat made out of the same material, just a test specimen. But if that's not possible, and you cannot take an objective measurement, the code requires, it puts it all in the specifier. It's up to the specifier's judgment, the design professional, to substantiate the product choice criteria. Now that's a loaded authority there, but we think this is a good first step as specifiers and designers get more and more educated around what surfaces seem like a good idea. Then we envision this code will evolve. Well, this also gets us to the point where we can start developing a history of success with certain products and certain applications so that the design community gets more educated. So another thing to note is when you get a lot of heavily textured surfaces, there are challenges beyond just being able to measure slip resistance, such as stain resistance, grout retention, those kinds of things. So there are a lot of things for the specifier to consider when you start to talk about heavily textured surfaces beyond just slip resistant. We won't get too far into the weeds there, but just wanted to raise that point. Go to the next slide, Dale. So how Let's talk about these measurements. I alluded to it earlier, but the standard is Ansi A326.3. This is for those level and incline scenarios where you can obtain a dynamic coefficient of friction measurement. It's the standard under the A108 committee, and it's simply the bot that slides across the surface and gives you a measurement. I want to note that TCNA has made this standard available for free because it's a safety standard, and in the spirit of making safety standards as accessible as possible. As publisher of the standard, TCNA does not charge for this standard. So you can go to our website, download the standard for free to learn more about Decoff and how the measurement is taken. And of course, our laboratory, as we offer a lot of testing services per our industry standards, is very experienced in running this test and available for hire. Next. So what about those scenarios? That's scenario 3, where you cannot take a Decoff measurement and the power is all on the specifier. Well, there still needs to be some kind of way for the industry and the specifier and the designers to start to communicate so that so it's not totally subjective. And there is a handy test called the German ramp based on a DIN standard 51130, to where it's exactly what it looks like in the imagery here. You take a flooring sample and you put it on the floor and lubricate it with water, and the technician walks over it as the incline increases, and as it increases and increases, when you detect that first slip, you measure that angle, and based on that angle, you can get a variety of descriptive classifications that give you an idea of slip resistance properties and where these flooring may be recommended. As you can imagine, it's not an ideal test for on-site testing in a code inspector environment. However, this is good for R&D purposes, and it's good for specifiers if they're completely in the dark and need to just have an idea of how slippery a surface may be. At the very early stages of design, it's a handy way to communicate, and our lab offers this service as well. We anticipate that this standard will get more and more traction, no pun intended, in the U.S. And as people start to look for any resources they can to educate themselves on the slip resistance characteristic of flooring. Next slide. So that was IAPMO. Again, we're pleased that the IAPMO criteria for the pool and spa code are an important first step in getting objective code criteria established. We're optimistic that that'll open the door for other improvements, not just in the IAPMO codes, but perhaps in other code organizations such as ICC. Because what's currently in there now with the International Building Code, section 1003.4 on slip resistance, Dale, I think you said it earlier, all it says is circulation paths of the means of egress, which basically means any flooring in the building that could lead towards an exit strategy. It just says they need to be slip resistant and securely attached. That's all it says. No minimum threshold, no standardized method of measurement. It just says they have to be slip resistant. This is ambiguous and problematic for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. And in fact, the industry has worked with several code proposals over the years. TCNA and others have collaborated, I think dating back to 2012. But it hasn't been easy because our standards, the awareness around our standards hasn't been there. Precedent set by other code organizations hasn't been there. But we think with this precedent that's been set with IAPMO, and with more and more awareness and familiarity on the subject, around the subject, we're optimistic. All I can say is the industry is going to continue working to improve the criteria in the spirit of safety, and with the intent that the best available standards are referenced. I'll also say, just coming up in a few weeks, IMI and TCNI are collaborating on a code change proposal for it'll be the 2023 code. And we're working on that, I'm sorry, the 2024 code, a 2021 code change, and if approved, which is, it's going to take some work, but if approved, would be adopted into the model framework in 2024, and beyond that, just whenever municipalities are able to adopt it. In the meantime, it's kind of like that third provision of the IAPMO code. If designers and specifiers need to gain insights into what does slip resistance mean, we encourage them to reach out to our laboratory, and suppliers also to reach out to our laboratory just to learn as much on that ramp testing and Decoff testing about their products, because those can all play a good role in serving as the justification for slip resistance in the design documents. and in the building construction documents. So that's there, and we'll continue to work on that as an industry. Next slide.
And I have to say, Bill, that the TCNA has really led the way in flooring in this. TCNA has been much more ahead of the game on slip resistance, on testing, on labeling products than a lot of others. I sat on a panel for the Specifiers Institute with concrete coatings and concrete, and they really kind of just throw their hands up and say, well, there's not really much we want to test right now. They don't really have any, they're not working on anything. So this is a great improvement over what we had. And I think you'll see others, hopefully other flooring industries start to adopt this.
Yep, definitely every year the awareness increases and more adoption and implementation increases, which is a good thing. Will definitely make floors safer and less ambiguous around the subject of slip resistance. Okay, next. Okay, I'm going to take the last few moments here to talk about green building codes. Perhaps many of you may not be as familiar that there are green codes as well. This isn't exactly pertinent to the 2021 changes, but it's still relevant to the 2021 discussion, because just like we have in the case of the International Code Council, we have the plumbing code, the mechanical code, the electrical code, the fire code. We also have the green code. And similar to those other codes I just mentioned, they're called framework overlay codes. What does that mean? That means they're not the building code in its entirety, but they're designed to coordinate with the IBC or the IRC and overlay those codes to enhance the provisions of them in the case here in terms of sustainability. And so again, they only becomes a legal matter if municipalities adopt it. But since the release of the IGCC, as you can imagine, the major code, I'll call them code savvy states, the ones that have been most up to date in their building code adoption, have actually adopted this to a pretty large degree. The 2018 code, not as much, but a lot of the provisions I'm going to share with you here date back to the 2016 and the 2014 code as well. And so the International Green Construction Code was originally developed by the ICC. There was a similar competitive model code, not by IPAMO, not by ICC, but by ASHRAE, called Standard 189.1, which was very similar to IGCC. As of the 2018 release of IGCC, those were merged into one document called IGCC and Standard 189, or I'm sorry, called IGCC powered by ASHRAE Standard 189.1. It's still perceived widely as, or still referred to widely as the Green Code. Next slide. So what do the criteria relevant to the tile industry? We talked about floors, safety. Mostly we talk about slip resistance. Walls, mostly we talk about do the tiles stick to the buildings. Now with floors and walls combined, from a sustainability, safety, and health standpoint, the Green Code, what do we talk about? Well, we talk about it either meeting industry standards, similar to our other stuff we ran through earlier, and we talk about, is the product transparent in its environmental impact? And so this is the section most relevant to the ceramic tile industry, 901-4143 in IGCC. And there's also, what you see in the parentheses there is important to note, because as you read through the codes, you'll see these parentheticals, which show what it would be called if you're speccing it in an ASHRAE state versus not in parentheses, what it would be called if it's being adopted in a jurisdiction that's an ICC state. So just something to keep in mind, a little technicality there. But it requires at least 10 products in the entire building either have an environmental product declaration, which I'll explain in a moment, or meet an industry standard certification program for sustainability, which, as I'll go through a little more in the case of tile, is called Green Squared. These criteria were introduced in 2015, and I list the organizations here so you can see there were some pretty heavy hitters. Tile was represented by TCNA, Carpet and Rug by CRI, the vinyl flooring industry, the Resilient Floor Covering Institute, but also you had the USGSA at the table for this code change proposal. You had the EPA. You also had the major certification organizations, NSF and UL Environment, among several others. And the reason I list those for you is because we were prepared in 2015 for these conversations to take place. Without our work at the standards level to create our green squared standard, and without our efforts to do our industry-wide environmental product declarations, the tile industry would not have had a stake in the development of these code criteria, and they very well could have been developed without reference to our industry programs, which would not have been a good thing. It would have meant the industry wouldn't have been on the menu for selection in a lot of these code savvy states that have progressively adopted the IGCC. So that was an important thing to note as our overall goal for the tile industry to become increasingly relevant in these code safety, health, and sustainability discussions. It's a good thing we were at the table then. Next slide. So the criteria requires, again, just to repeat, 10 products either have an EPD or meet and certify a certification program for the relevant industry. What is an EPD? And I'm not going to get too far in depth here, but just so you know what it is, it's an industry, it's a transparent, standardized way of reporting what the environmental impacts are. The analogy we like to use is like a nutrition label for building products. And we have one in the tile industry. In fact, we have 3 industry-wide EPDs, which I'll speak to you in a moment about. But these industry-wide EPDs are specifically called out in those criteria I showed you on the previous slide. Next. So the 3 EPDs we have one for ceramic tile, we have one for mortar, and we have one for grout. Why is this important? Well, the cool thing about specifying tile to meet code criteria, if the criteria require 10 products have these provisions, just by specifying tile, you're going to need a mortar, you're going to need a grout, so you can cross out 3 of your 10 products in the whole building toward code compliance. So that's a major selling point for the industry and something to keep in mind, not just in these building code compliance efforts, but also in a number of the other green building voluntary programs such as LEED and other green building programs. And just by specifying products which are included in these industry-wide EPDs, which as you can see in the bottom, the list of mortar and grout companies represented, and then on the right side in the bottom, the list of ceramic tile companies represented. These are the North American companies represented by our North American EPDs. I should note it doesn't have to be North American companies. The Italian Manufacturers Association has their industry-wide EPDs, as does the Spanish. So most tile products, if they're major players, are pretty well covered by our host of industry-wide EPDs. North America is the only region that has industry-wide EPDs for mortar and grout. Next slide. So the other half, so the and or, you can have 10, the product specified, you got to have 10 that at least have an EPD or that are certified to meet a standard. So in the case of our standard, it's Ansi A 138.1, commonly referred to as green squared. In fact, the certification around the standard is called green squared. So by specifying green squared certified products, it means you're specifying products certified to meet the A138.1 standard, which means they meet a host of criteria. It's not just one definition of sustainability. It's what's called a multi-attribute sustainability standard, where it takes recycled content, VOCs, regionality of the manufacturers and proximity of the manufacturing of the raw material sites, social criteria, making sure that they follow all the protocols that are internationally recognized for labor, or everything you can think of that we define green by is encompassed in this standard here. So that's our industry standard, not just for ceramic tile, but for the whole industry, for tile setting materials as well. Next slide. So just to touch briefly on green squared certification, if you see the logo there, then you know that it has been certified to meet the standard by one of our independent industry approved certifiers, either UL or SCS. In fact, you can visit greensquaredcertified.com to find a list of which products bear that logo. You can also access a list of products through UL and SCS's independent libraries. But one thing that's interesting to note is you can have products that either meet the EPD or the green square. They count towards that 10 product threshold in the green building code. But if a product is included in those EPDs and has green squared, it counts double. So it counts as 2 of the 10 requirements. So theoretically, you could specify a tile installation with a mortar and grout that are ceramic or that are green squared certified, a ceramic tile that are green squared certified, all of which are included in the EPDs, and you've checked off 6 of your 10 products. So something interesting to keep in mind. Next slide. So yeah, that's how I wanted to close. It's clear, the industry, when we think of of floors, and we think of slip resistance in terms of safety the most. When we think of walls, we think of everything that Will and Dale went through. When we think of floors and walls combined, we think of the sustainability aspects of the code. And there are other areas of relevance for the industry in the code, but that was a good highlight of the ones we're focused the most on in 2021. So with that, hand it back over to either Dale or Will to close this thing out.
Cool, great information. And I think that wraps us up. Jim, do we have questions?
First of all, I want to thank the three of you. That was a lot of information. I want to ask our audience, should we have them start over? There was a lot there. So, but here's what's really important, everybody. What you just watched, the presentation you just watched, by next week, early next week, will be on the NTCA YouTube channel. There's so much information. I think you probably need to go through it 2 or 3 times just to get it all and feel somewhat familiar with it. But you guys are great. And yes, we do have some comments. We have some questions here. I'm going to start with the first one, and it's a comment. And I'm just going to read it as it says it. Wow, I can't believe that Texas is still following the 2003 codes. That means you could still be using green board in wet areas and meet code. That is amazing.
Yeah, but Jim, Dale mentioned something very important and relevant there. Texas, I believe, is a home adoption state. So just because the state has not adopted it doesn't mean a local municipality hasn't adopted it.
Good point. The cities can have their own codes and adopt those codes. Is that correct?
Correct. And then the AHJs may be kicking that out at the local level.
Okay. Well, I still thought it was a good comment. So.
Yeah, I don't do Texas, so I couldn't comment on that. But as you mentioned, I couldn't imagine them allowing that.
And here's just a really quick question: when did Ansi A108.20 go into effect? The standards for exterior GPT installation. Anyone?
Will, you're on mute.
Will's muted. We lost Will.
All right, I'll take that. It's published. I believe it's been published for 2021 by TCNA as the standards promulgator for the A108 committee. If it hadn't been published yet, it is a 2021 publication, so it should be there. As far as it depends what you mean by going into effect. It goes into effect as soon as somebody specifies it, so that could be any day now, but it is published.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize for the mute. It is available currently.
Yeah,
so
right.
It was balloted. We balloted it last year. We've been working on it for a few years. So you can go on right now and get the updated version. So they combined all of the standards into one book or one standard. So you've got A137.3 material, 19 for interior and 20 for exterior, all in one standard book.
It's one book for the GPT standards. So it just came out, just recently came out. It is available. You can go to TCNA and buy that Ansi book. So it is available. Good question. All right. Any thoughts on when California might adopt the new 2021 IBC changes?
So you're probably looking at 2023 would be, they'll probably take it at least until next year to review it. And then if they do adopt it, it'll be 2023. Probably at 2 years, it's quickest.
Thank you. Next question. So as we're seeing a lot of move towards foam boards, backer boards, showers, is foam for the tile industry included in the green certificate? Bill.
Foam. Let me think about this for a minute.
Yeah, if I may comment on that.
Yeah.
First of all, we have to have a standard for the foam core boards. So we currently don't have an inclusive standard. So in the MMSA committees, or Material Methods and Standards committees, we are currently in subcommittee to develop an ANSI standard specific to foam core boards and all the accessories related. So I think that once we get through that and define a standard, develop it, ballot it, pass it, publish it, I think then it can be lobbied into the recognition for contributions. However, I'm not the absolute expert on that. Some manufacturers may have ways that they already have that attribute.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I was trying to remember where we exactly were on that effort, but for sure, other backer boards are within the scope of the green squared certification, but only the ones that are defined by performance and industry specifications, cement board, fiber cement, gypsum, and others. But yeah, I don't believe foam yet, unless the manufacturer has found a way to define from a standard standpoint. Again, with the third party certifiers, TCNA doesn't certify, so it's really at the discretion of the certifier if something falls within the scope of the standard.
Great. So with all this discussion on standards and methods and everything, someone would like to know if the 2021 TCNA handbook is available yet. And I don't think it's gone out yet. Has it, Bill?
Not yet. The 2021 handbook?
Correct.
We should be getting it from the publisher any day now. So definitely by
That's what I've been told too. That's what I've been told too, definitely.
Yeah.
So it's at the printer and should be coming out soon.
I hope very much we'll be able to hand you a physical copy in person at coverings.
Yeah, that'll be nice. That'll be great. So a lot of new stuff in there, a lot of good stuff. All right, last but not least, this is from a lot of people, but nice job, you guys. You did a great job, a lot of information. I can't thank you enough. And I want everybody here to know that we have our next webinar, educational webinar, is actually going to be presented by Y Tile, and Dow Tile will be sponsoring it, but it should be another great educational and learning experience for everybody on what we're doing in our industry. You guys, this was really great. I've been in this business for almost going on close to 40 years now, and every time I listen to this, I learn something new. I mean, I know a lot of it's updated and whatever, but I really appreciate it. I know everybody else here did, and I want to thank you guys, and we'll be in touch soon. Okay?
Fantastic. Thank you,
All
Jim.
right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bill.
audience. Thanks, audience. Really appreciate you guys being here, everybody being here. And we'll be continuing these, as I said. March 30th will be our next one, and invites will go out shortly. Everybody, have a great week. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.